Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to another phenomenal Friday and Angular Air. I'm so excited to be joined today with these two lovely people to my side. I directions, my name is Alyssa Nichol, and with me I have Justin Schwarzenberger. Hi, Justin. Hi.
Hey, how's it going?
Oh, so excited. Are you ready for this Friday? You feel it? You feeling it?
Then let me tell you how I'm ready for this Friday, because this Friday today is Diablo 4 beta day. And so,
Oh.
it's actually, I think, out now.
Did you
So
get the
I'm,
did you download the stuff? Like, are you
yeah,
ready?
oh, yeah.
Okay, because the
Yeah.
worst feeling in the world is oh, it's DLC day, right? The drop, and then you go and sit down, and you're like, I didn't download
Right.
anything. Yeah, and then you just gotta
Yeah.
wait. We also are joined by the beautiful Mike Brocky, who's below me. A very easy direction to
I'm
identify.
I'm not welcoming myself or saying hi yet. Justin, does this affect our gaming time?
Yes. Yeah, it's going to a little bit. Yes, it is. It is. Both machines, he's out.
So it's just me and Justin today.
Both machines have it prepped. So my wife and I are going to be playing it. So yeah, you
Get
know.
it.
You're going to the back of the bus, sorry, but we will have some time at some point.
At some point,
I
okay,
promise.
that's fair. It's a temporary situation. Got it. I am well.
Hello.
I'm flustered, but
Why
we
are
will
you flustered, Mike? Hi,
because I don't know
Christoph.
what we're
Hi,
doing today.
Boo. Okay, so
I like
the
to have a plan that I ignore and don't pay attention to until
Mike
5 minutes before the show.
Mike
I can't do that
apparently
today.
is one of these people. Happy St. Patrick's Day, by the way.
Oh
Same.
yeah, there's that too.
Yeah, I
Ooh,
did
I
the
got my
green.
green.
The green. Yeah, Mike, you're in green. Wait, did you do that on purpose, Mike?
No,
Oh, okay.
it was on top of the pile. So hello today's shirt.
So we, of course, I know people are saying Renaissance needs more time than expected. Yeah. So we had a little problem with our guest today. We are rescheduling that episode. We will be doing that episode. But apparently Mike doesn't like rolling with the punches.
Yeah.
So we're just having to give him a little.
I don't mind it. I was trying to set you up to talk about it.
Oh, okay. I was like, Mike, you're usually better than this in the moment.
I'm good.
I should learn when you're teeing me up. So today we're going to be talking about standalone components. They've been around for a hot minute. Not super widely used, I wouldn't say. I would say they are widely talked about. I wouldn't say they're widely used. And there's a couple reasons, like whether it's tooling doesn't fully support it yet, whether the community just doesn't understand it yet. So we're going to just talk about that today. It might not be a full-length episode. We'll just see how far the conversation takes us. But we want to talk about what it is, why it is, and how you can use it, if you can use it right now. Right, where is it at in its release cycle? So yeah, let us discuss. And sorry for the late start. We're here though. We're here.
But to add on, we will be doing a deeper dive, a full comprehensive conversation with Manfred, which may slightly overlap what we talk about today. I don't know where we're going today, but would always love to hear Manfred's insights.
Yes. Oh, for sure. And Manfred, we hope you feel better, darling. And we will see you when we see you. We'll get that one up on the calendar though again soon. But if you are here joining us, say hi in the chat. We'd love to talk to you. And we're going to talk about bum. I keep wanting to say signals, so I'm trying, doing my best in my head to say, don't say signals. Don't say. I don't know why.
Today,
standalone. Standalone.
Today is a blank canvas. If we decide to paint part of today's canvas with signals, then so be it.
But I do believe that Manfred's going to talk about signals, right? So we don't want to steal too much thunder.
Too much of his thunder. Right? Hi, Eugene. Hi. So, boys, we were talking about this right before we went live. First of all, when did Ivy come out? Was that 14 or was that?
Ivy was 9.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
I'm glad you had that answer because I do not have that answer.
I'm fairly certain. Ivy may have been optional 9 and
okay.
There in
I'm
10,
like 9.
Ballpark 9-10.
Okay. And standalone, was that even a thought in 9? Like, do you guys remember when the first time you thought this is happening in Angular? Like standalone modules, standalone components, like that's gonna, like, was it 14 when you first had that thought, or did you see it coming? Like,
I did not see it coming, but we can talk about history as well. So 14.2, I believe, is when standalone was included. But I think, well, we can shape today's episode however we want. But I think that standalone is part of a bigger picture. And I'm glad you brought up Ivy, because Ivy was promised as this, the terming may be a little off-putting here, but almost like a gateway drug, right? To set the foundation of, hey, once Ivy's in,
it really was. The way everyone was talking about it, especially the team, they were like, you don't understand what this is going to unlock. And I would look at them with a blank face and be like, I really don't. Like, I don't know why you're so excited. But like, there's been, the previous title of the show today was The Angular Renaissance. And Manfred had like jokingly said that of like, oh, that could be the title, because there are so many things coming out in Angular right now, like things standalone that's already out, signals and reactivity that's coming, and then even further to topics like hydration and SSR and what the future looks like for web apps in general. And so it's a really exciting time. I would love to know both of your opinions. Do you think this is happening because Ivy, obviously Ivy did lay the foundation for that, or is it happening because of the key players on the Angular team right now, and like they're pushing this innovation forward? Like, because I've never seen so many it's innovation. It's just cool.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combination of all those things, obviously. I mean, I know there's been discussion about, moving away from NG modules at some point, or making them optional, right? And so I think like the standalone comes as part of that sort of concept, right? Which is really interesting. I'm sure like we talk about the history, we'll go back to the history where there wasn't any modules yet, right? And now we're kind of going back to that. But I think again, the Ivy thing, the talk was about that is going to unlock the new rendering engine, all that stuff under the hood is going to unlock the opportunity to explore more of these things, right? And as all that stuff becomes stable and dialed in, then now we're able to, go down that renaissance and try these new things and start, making these things happen that were on the list, right? And then us as consumers get to reap the benefits of that, obviously. The standalone is really, it's interesting because it's almost like a journey back to the past when Angular 2 was first kind of presented to us, right? And we're going back to that opportunity, which is really cool. But yeah, I think it's a mix of all that stuff, right? It's all those pieces coming together. Then obviously the team that's there and everybody pushing things forward, and the opportunity. And I think the opportunity to explore these options, right, is what Ivy really unlocked, right?
Yeah, I was laughing because when you mentioned 2, it just made me think of the tombstones.
That was 1 into 2, and kind of the idea before NG modules. NG modules came out with version 2, but Justin's was referring to pre-release of version 2 sometime in the betas, and it pains me to know that I think it was around like 40 or so. Like a version of 40 or something like that in the beta.
Like when you were 40? When I was 40? Or you mean
that was longer ago.
I'm like, what version numbers is he talking about?
There were a bunch of different betas, and there was some iteration in which modules were introduced.
I see. Okay.
And they were introduced as basically a way of helping the compiler. Thank you, kiddo. I can now hydrate.
Your application or your body?
I can't hydrate my application.
You guys made jokes.
So, but they were introduced as a way of saying, hey, this is a compilation unit. We're going to break it down to this piece. We're going to help the Angular compiler. And this is however long ago, 8 years ago or so, that we need to be able to provide that information to the compiler because it wasn't advanced enough, and maybe there wasn't enough knowledge or robustness to TypeScript to be able to provide that. And I believe even around that time, like the idea of not using TypeScript was still floating around.
No, it was for sure. And I was on one of those teams that was like, come on, CoffeeScript. we lost.
I've heard that you were in that boat from Austin a few times.
Yeah, I know. He likes to keep that one going. But I remember, that's why I so vividly remember it, because my team was like, no, they're not going to make us use TypeScript. And then lols, right? Like,
but well, it's really interesting. Like when we talk about like dependency injection, right? And like dependency injection, the concept of dependency injection is pretty gnarly to grasp when you haven't done it before, right? And so
Yes.
all of a sudden we've got Angular 2, we've got dependency injection, right? And we've got this concept of that, along with this idea of how are you going to bundle things together, right? And how conceptually, from a mind state, when you build an application, how are you going to think about, like, my component needs XYZ, and maybe the services that it needs this, and how do you categorize and collect that? And I think, like, part of that, the whole modules thing was giving that kind of direction of saying, hey, here's kind of a solution for you to help kind of that mind map of it.
Well, and that's the reason that I'm still very, like, kind of lost with standalone, because I don't understand how we could, like, it sounds like it would be a mess.
I've got you.
It's
I've got you.
amazing.
This
It's
is
amazing.
what I was just about to talk about. So when you think about the idea of an ng module, what it's doing, the things that it's
like a bucket, right? It's just like,
kind of these
you don't
things.
think it's a bucket?
It kind of is, yeah.
It's a bucket.
You take about the idea of the things that you're declaring, your directives, your pipes, right? And your components that they may be important in an application. I don't know. But you have these things that you're declaring, and the rest of the ng module is basically saying, here's all this other crap stuff. Maybe crap. Well, my code's crap. Your code may not be. But here's all this other stuff that those things need.
Yeah.
They're the main players, right? Your components, your directives, and your pipes.
And you're saying it's going to be fine just to take that away.
But it's saying, hey, with those things, this is what it needs for those to work.
Right.
And I'm telling the compiler, hey, go get these things because I'm going to need them. My people here, my directives, components, and pipes need these things. Standalone conceptually is saying, all right, instead of doing a group of these things, we're just going to do one individual one. And some people were already accomplishing that with something called SCAM, which was a single component as module. Yes. And that would be single component directive pipe as a module. Yes. So it was, hey, here's a module that is declaring all the stuff that it's going to need. And what standalone is doing is saying, all right, I get what you're trying to do there, of saying, hey, this is what that guy's going to need, to saying, I'm sufficient now. I've grown up a bit. I can tell you what I need, and moving those declarations of, hey, in order to set me up and in order to be able to create me and allow me to do what I need to do, I'm going to let you, or I'm going to tell you myself what I need.
So like in the SCAM, you have one file that would have the component, at the top of the file. Then you have an ng module, and that ng module
potentially single file.
I mean, you can break it up, but the idea is that they're kind of next to each other, right? And this ng module is specific for the component, and so you're in the ng module declaring everything that the component needs, right? You're importing anything, providing whatever the component needs, and then you're declaring the component in there, and then everything else that needs to use your component brings in that ng module that just cares about the stuff for the component. And now with standalone, you're taking like that module declaration, the stuff that's in there, and you're able to put it in the component decorator. So now you just have your component, and it in the component decorator is able to say all the stuff that it needs, and now everything can just import your component, and it comes like all ready to go, right? And you kind of have everything centralized.
If you're coming from a SCAM mindset, I feel like it would be pretty, like you're saying, pretty easy. You're just getting rid of the cruft that's wrapping the module. But if you're not, like if you've never adopted that, like then that's where you're like, I have to declare everything for all the things. Like what?
All right.
It's
So
like
you want to go? Or you want me to go?
let me go real quick. It's like there's a trade-off, right? Like my components now, when I make them standalone, they're very verbose, right? They say all the things that are in there that they need now.
Right.
But conceptually, from that mind map that I was talking about, it's for me, it's more clear, because now I say, hey, this component, if this component has 3 children that it has, right? And if we were doing it the other way, we'd have an ng module, let's say for our feature way over here, and we have our component, and then we have the 3 components that it needs. And over in this ng module over here, we would declare all 4 components, right? And so there's like this concept of like over here, I'm saying I need all 4 of these to make this feature work, but I really don't know the relationship that hey, this one component only needs a 3. So now if I put them all in this one component and say, hey, it has 3 people over here that 3 components it needs, now I understand that component has everything that it needs. Because it's really easy, like, to get in a situation where you're like, I'm gonna add my component, I'm gonna use a child component. Why is it not working? Oh, I forgot to declare my child component way over here.
Right.
So I think the mental map of that becomes easier.
So how does it work to try it?
I want to build.
Build, Mike.
Because that's exactly where I was going.
Yeah.
So when did the two of you start using Angular? Not AngularJS, Angular.
When did it drop?
Version 2, beta, alpha?
JS.
2+ or non 1.x.
Whenever it was released into production.
Yes.
So before production.
Exactly. And I'm in the same boat. But that's 8 years ago, ballpark.
That's so crazy.
It is. But you've had 8 years of experience and knowledge that you've built using modules, right? That's ingrained in you. Oh, hey, I need to be able to use this component. Oh, it needs to be in a module. You know that. That's just there now. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Like, hey, if I'm creating a div tag, I need to close the div tag.
It's like
right?
whenever all of the C# people tell me, oh, wow, I just can't believe you do it that way in JavaScript. And I'm like, this is literally all I've ever known. Right. This feels natural, right? And so it's the same with modules.
I've got it. Yeah, it feels natural because you've been doing it for so long.
Yeah.
But take somebody who hasn't done Angular before, who's new to the ecosystem. Yeah, I'm there. I think AngularJS I was like 1.0.7 is.
Oh my god,
you ever played?
You were 1.0.
I started playing with it in 1.0.7. Actually, Ben Lush introduced me to it. It was very cool. It was a very enlightening day. I remember it well. Anyway,
you had a good memory.
I know,
for some things, yes. For some, it's like
I don't remember what you just said 5 minutes ago.
Right? Yeah, like yeah.
And neither do I. But we've had this ingrained in our head. But you take somebody who's coming new to this.
Yeah.
Hey, I know some JavaScript. Maybe I did React. Maybe I did Vue. Maybe I did something else. And it's like, all right, I want to get started. All right, well, here's a new project. And I know that those things get generated and you have an app component, you can play with that. But as soon as you go and try and create a component on your own, you have to say, all right, well, I created a component. Cool, I've got that thing. I want to use it. No, you can't use it. So you've got this mental capacity that what you own. And I don't care how big it is. Of some people's may be larger than others, but say it's this big. Mm-hmm. You need to take this much and learn modules to say, all right, I can create a component, but I need to take this chunk to say, what's a module? How do I get it to work? But if we can take that away and put all of the knowledge and learning directly into the pieces that are going to deliver visuals and an application to your users without a layer of abstraction, without having to learn something else on top of it, more power to you. It's going to lower the barrier to entry and simplify. And we may not see it as a simplification because of our experience with NG modules, but overall, I see it as a huge simplification that everything's all in one place. Sure, it's going to be a little bit more verbose because you are declaring your imports right there in the same file, but it's clear of, oh, hey, you want to use ngif? Hey, I'm importing ngif to say that's what I'm using. It's more granular if you want, because you could also say, hey, I'm going to bring in common module. Give me my if, give me my switch, give me all those pieces separately. Mm-hmm. And you can pull in an ng module as well, but you can pull in the individual chunks that Angular has started to break out and expose on their own.
Are there any gotchas that you two see for whether it's like ecosystem, so it's like a third party, like what am I going to run into? Because like this sounds great, but like I feel like we're avoiding talking about is there any issues like with like if they're not using it but I'm using it, or no, it's mix and match, do whatever.
Justin, you're nodding your head. You're like, I want to dive into that because I have some thoughts of it, but I'll let you go first.
Yeah, so I'll talk from your existing application standpoint, right? So like, regardless of third-party modules or anything like that, let's talk about your existing application. So I have an application. It is already ng moduleified forever, right? A bunch of components. I'm like, hey, how do I want to start consuming and going standalone, right? Yes. Well, when you start from like the top down and you say, okay, I'm going to have a route that's going to go to a component now instead of a module, right? Cool, I can do that. I can get in there, I can create my standalone component, I can route to it, I can lazy load it, I'm kind of off and running. And
Yeah.
now that component is going to have children inside of it, right? So
Mhm.
now at that point I say, okay, well, how am I going to handle this? And so if I can, the cool thing about it is like I can still bring in that component. Like I said, let's say I have like a page component, right? And that component is orchestrating just the entire content of that page. And I say that's going to have child component, and the child component is not standalone yet. I can still import the ng module where that child component is declared into my standalone component. And so I can consume non-standalone components and standalone components from my parent component. So that's fine. But when I start doing the route tree, so let's say I have like in my route tree, I have a component that operates as my shell, right? My header and footer. And then in that, there's another sub route that then loads in the content of the main part component. And that content is a standalone, but the shell is still not. I need to make that shell standalone. Like it's going to complain.
You do?
Yeah. Yeah. So I hit that just the other day. So it's interesting. So I think there's like,
Mike.
yeah, I don't know.
Like
that's an interesting scenario. Because the point that I was going to talk about is the interoperability between standalone and modules. I guess that we'll use those as a distinction: ng module versus standalone. And from a standalone, you can pull in an ng module, and from an ng module, you can pull in a component. Now, you don't want to declare that because you can't declare a component in a ng module because essentially it's its own beast, but you can import it to say, hey, this is a dependency. I want to use this and import it in, but you can't declare it and say, I own this thing. I'm in control of this thing, because it's its own boss. But if there's a potential scenario with the router of how do you configure routing to a component versus routing to a module, I don't think the router cares because its API supports both, in that you can lazy load both directly to a component and to an ng module. So I find it surprising that isn't working.
I was surprised too. I'll have to investigate it some more, but there was something about it that, like, I had this route tree, and again, like, part of the route tree had a component that wasn't standalone and another one was, and it was like, yo, this component's not standalone. So so some of the things like that, but so far most of the stuff I've able to kind of navigate through and find a solution for, and it's been pretty smooth.
Did you say cheese hats?
Cheese hats.
No, I said it does. I was going to bring up YouTube, and yeah, I was like, oh, it's us. I was surprised because initially, with it being mad for the tile on the link for the video was.
No, I'm very excited to use it. If let's say you have a completely standalone app, like every part of it.
That's a dream, huh?
Let's say you've reached the top of that mountain. What happens that, like, I'm assuming your app is still fine with consuming other people's that like have modules still, right? Like if I'm like including components or other, like what happens?
So that brings us back to what you were originally talking about regarding third-party library authors, that some library authors out there are starting to upgrade to expose standalone pieces and ng modules. While
both, because they just want to support like both forever,
as long as both are in the ecosystem. As a library author, I don't want to be restricted to say,
right,
unless you're using standalone, you can't use my stuff.
That's
but
true.
I believe that in the original blog post that Angular put out, and we could probably go and find the link, that they talked about library authors and how to expose things as both standalone and as part of an ng module. And I think from an ng module standpoint, you just need to import your standalone piece, again, because you can't declare it, and then just export that import. to say, hey, I'm pulling this thing in, but I'm also exposing it to make it available. Therefore, making it available through both mechanisms.
Okay. Oh, I'm excited. If you want to get rid of, I think the last question I have around standalone is,
you're going to have more.
Well, maybe. This is it for all time. If you go all the way down to like the base module, right? Like your app module.
Mm-hmm.
What did you do? What do you do?
It's a good question.
I don't know what to do.
It's pretty cool.
What?
I think it's
Do you
pretty
just
cool.
delete it? I don't.
So there's a Bootstrap function that is generated by all new applications right now. And inside of main.ts, it basically imports in app.module. And I believe the name of the function is Bootstrap. And you pass it your app module as well as some configuration. With standalone, they released a new function called Bootstrap application, which takes in a component and configuration. So instead of bootstrapping an actual ng module, you bootstrap a single component, and then your component tree defines your hierarchy instead of a module-based hierarchy.
So you know how an ng module, like when you create an ng module, you use the imports property on the decorator, right?
Yeah.
And you say, here's all the things that it depends. I need to import other modules, right?
Mm-hmm.
With the standalone component, you can import that component. And it's almost for me, I kind of think about it like, oh, well, my component is kind of like a module, ng module at that point. Standalone component's almost like an ng module. So I'm importing it, right? The same way I import these other ng modules. Now I'm just orchestrating the module stuff, and I'm just plugging in my component ones that are standalone as their own module, essentially.
And this is like, we do that. We point to the main component that is our, module rolled into one in the Bootstrap file. Like, where do we do that?
Yeah, you would inside of your main.ts.
So you think I'm not doing it? I have to use a schematic to do it?
No, you can do it.
Yeah, you can do this all manually. Schematics are just helpers to basically say, hey, here's the shortcut. Go. If you wanted to be able to create one of these things, run the schematic and it'll create it for you. So what happens, we'll take it a level higher, that when you run ng build or ng serve, that you start at the configuration in Angular JSON. And inside there, it says, where's your main file? Where do I start? As I'm building your application, where do I start discovering TypeScript from? And that file by default, based off of the schematics, is main.ts, which lives above the app folder at the source folder.
Wait, has main.ts always existed?
Yes.
Forever.
You can go look at your applications. Yeah, it's there.
Like back at 2D, or like whenever I guess they decided to use TypeScript, like is whenever it started. Okay.
Fairly sure.
We typically don't, as app developers, we don't need to, right? It's like, oh, well, it's doing its setup stuff. And
I personally discovered it like the other day. I was like, who are you? Do I need you? Can I delete you? Right? Like I was.
It's basically start here, TypeScript, start discovering my application, my source tree, my whole application. So when it starts there, inside there, it pulls in a function from Angular. I think it's at Angular core that it called Bootstrap. And that needs to pull in an ng module. And I think I lost a little bit of the train where I was going with that. But it's basically saying, hey, go give me the configuration of how to start. And that starts with an ng module. And I believe that the app module has a Bootstrap component as part of the definition of the ng module that basically says, when you bootstrap, this is the component that I want you to render. And that's where that logic kind of lives somewhere else, being that somewhere else is an ng module. Whereas the new API, where you start with standalone, is Bootstrap application. And that says, just give me the component and it'll tell me all of its dependencies. And then I can walk the tree from there of what dependencies does it have and need.
Okay.
But remember, you have this seed that was planted many years ago of understanding an ng module that is a layer of abstraction that's not necessary to run an application. And that's why standalones come into play. And I'm happy about the simplification because you don't have to worry about that mental load. Your main.ts is basically saying, all right, I'm ready to start. Tell me where to start. And instead of going to this module, like, what the heck's a module? You know, because you've been using them. But to somebody new, I have no idea what that is. It says Bootstrap application, and I want you to bootstrap app component. Oh, I know what a component is. That's a little piece of DOM that I can do stuff with.
Right.
Render this thing. Cool. Well, where's that? Oh, it's right here. I'll go and navigate to that file because it's been imported, typical TypeScript, JavaScript import. I can go there and say, oh, what does it need? What are its children? Oh, it has routes? Oh, cool. I'll go ahead and pass that in as well. Or go traverse down that to find what I need. And you don't have to worry about that extra layer of saying, oh, hey, ng module, cool. I'm going to go and talk to you. And then it's basically going to say, hey, go talk to my next door neighbor.
Right.
And
so this bootstrapping you're saying happens in main.
Yes.
Does main also point to our route file?
Yes. So Bootstrap application takes in two parameters. It takes in, and I know because I've been working on this, that it takes in two things. It takes in the component that you want to render.
Yep.
And also something called an application configuration, where you can specify some root level configuration things.
Yeah, I've turned off things in there before.
The router. I'm going to provide the router at the root injector, basically.
Okay.
I'm going to be using HTTP. Toss that in here so that you can set that up.
Okay.
And that's how all that gets configured.
Steve was saying, I appreciate that things like standalone and signals are easier to grasp than what they have before. But in real life, people coming to Angular now see tons of content on both the old and new ways. That's true. Now they also have to learn what and when to use, not to mention needing to know it all. It reminds me of like .NET though. Like, I mean, we're not the first community to go through this conundrum of what is the learning path, right? Like,
yeah, but I think that's a great take that Steve has on it. You know, like I was reading that and yeah, it's that question of it's an interesting thing because it's not just like what we're doing, what Angular's doing to make things simpler, right? It's like they're delivering a product that they're trying to meet the needs of new people coming in and trying to meet the needs of people that have been using it for a long time, right? And it's like an interesting support scenario that needs to be played out. And then when you do that, I think that's what unfolds that Steve is mentioning here is that as a result of doing all those things, now you have this platform that has a bunch of different paths to go down, right? That you can do. And it's interesting, Mike, as you just explained all that stuff, it feels very complicated. Like it's like standalone's easier, but like all that description is like, wow, that's a lot to also grasp, right?
The reason why it's difficult is because of the history with ng modules. If we were to take that description that I just did, and I'll run through it here again in a second, without ng modules, I think it becomes a lot clearer. To Steve's point, to wrap up talking about that, is what you're describing about the differences of documentation, and not so much Angular documentation, but more so community articles. Yeah. It's similar to what Angular as a community went through, going from AngularJS to Angular. Of what is this content actually talking about? And you get like 5 minutes into reading an article where it's doing all this setup, and then you're like, let's talk about AngularJS. I want to know about Angular. and you had to be cognizant about what you talked about or what you read to say, all right, what context is this in? I did the first thing I would do when reading articles is find me the date. When was this published? Is this relevant now or was it relevant before? So I think that those types of things will be worked out. We've been given a new set of tools. We as a community are in the process of defining and describing how to best utilize these tools. What's the prescribed way to use these? What are best practices to utilize these to the best of our ability? And some people are down to go ahead and do that exploration. Sounds like Steve's deep into that himself. To find, hey, is this something that I need to research, or you know what, do I wait a month, 3 months, 6 months to dive into that and say, all right, I don't have the time to play with the different scenarios. Let somebody else figure out what the best practices are. And I think that Angular themselves are doing that, and I imagine standalone pieces are going to start falling into the style guide as well, and potentially become default. To say, hey, when you create a new application, it's going to be standalone. Roll with that. But going back to the simplification and understanding. So to talk about what it means to start an application with standalone, your main.ts is pointed to from AngularJSON. That gets generated for you. It's already there for you. Inside of main.ts, again, you don't have to configure this. The schematics will handle this for you. It's going to Bootstrap application, which takes in a component and the configuration for that. An application configuration, which is like routes and external dependencies. Hey, set up an NGRX store. Here's HTTP. Here are my routes. The same thing you would do inside of app module. Those types of things get brought in at that level. And from there, you're just dealing with components. What dependencies does that component have? I can find it directly on a component. So Bootstrap application is, this is what I want to use. This is what it needs to run. And a lot of those things are external things are going to be defined in the app configuration, and the internal application pieces are going to be in the imports of the components. No look into separate files, nothing else.
I'll give us a win here on this,
Simple.
right?
I just gave you a big win. Huge.
No,
W.
I'll take it to the next level. I'll take it to the next level, right? Like really at that top level, I don't think we really need to care, right? Like if I have an existing app and I'm like, I want to start using standalone, I just do standalone for everything beyond the initial app module, right? And then I worry about the app module later, because depending on how your architecture is set up, like if your app module is loading a bunch of stuff, then now you probably have a lot more complexity to kind of like work out. But let's say your app module is, just initializing and setting up the app, and then you have features that do everything else. Well, you can get in there and make everything else standalone and work your way towards everything else standalone and not even care about the bootstrap in your app module. And it could still be bootstrapping an ng module, right? And then you can come to that later, focus if you want to change that, right? But I don't think like in terms of dealing with your features and stuff, that's as much of a concern. And if you're starting a new app, and you're able to start a new app as standalone only, then you're going to run a generator to create that bootstrap for you, and you're still not going to care about it. The same way we haven't cared about our main TS forever, right? Because it just happens and then it's there and it's done. So I think that the discussion about the bootstrap process at the top level is interesting and good to know and good to learn. But I think from a simplicity standpoint where I mentioned like, hey, that sounds complex. I think if I roll back and say, are we actually even going to really deal with that much? I think that like we can avoid dealing with that, in those two scenarios.
As you're updating applications, yes. I mean, we talked about the interoperability between standalone and ng modules. And if that's something that is not deemed as important if you want to migrate to standalone and you want to put that off till the end, that's fine. Just know that the concept of bootstrapping an ng module and bootstrapping and a component are different in that the syntax and the calls that you need to make.
Yeah, the mechanics of it, right? The syntax and mechanics. But like I've been updating an application with standalone, and I don't even care about the app module level. Like that can be done later because it just really doesn't have, a big benefit, for me, because I don't have an app module where it has the app component, the top level component that has dependencies on a bunch of other components. It basically has a router outlet, right? And so as a result, I don't care really about making that one standalone. I care about all the other ones that are interesting that have child components that need to understand, like they come with this, right? Yeah. So I think from that standpoint.
Does this just help DX, like developer experience, or is this actually if you do this work, are there gains for users as well?
What a great question. That's a great question. This is interesting because I haven't really spent a whole lot of time of looking at the bundle, right? And so, but I really question okay, if I'm going into my standalone and I've got, let's say I make 3 components that I can route to, right? And all 3 of those use the same child components, right? And they just do a different thing. And in these standalone components, the 3 standalone components, I'm importing each of those other child components, right? Yes. So now I have 3 different components that all have dependencies on 3 different things. Like, is the compiler making only one bundle of those 3 children to deliver to the user? Or is it like my standalone component now has a bundle, and it has a bundle now I have duplicated code that gets delivered to the client? Mike, do you have an answer on that? But that would be my question of like, standalone from a mental standpoint, DX makes, helps, but then what is the actual runtime experience?
So I think I'm going to be open. I don't know the answer to that question. However, I think that when using standalone, make the compiler's job easier, because if I'm pulling in those 3 components, and each one is using, say, a total of 10 different dependencies, and it's split up like 442 across those 3. Quick math. That what happens if I stop using one in one component, or I stop using 3 of them? Well, those dependencies are declared somewhere separately. So I don't know if I'm still using those unless I go check all 3 components that are declaring at that point, or being declared in part of that module. So I may not do a good job of cleaning that up. But if I'm in a standalone environment where I'm declaring all of the necessary pieces to build that component or use that component, if I stop using one, I can delete it right then and there, because I know that I'm only responsible for me and my dependencies. So I think from that regard, it may help with the compiler to be a little bit faster from the compiler standpoint. But that's also a developer experience of knowing when to say, hey, I'm no longer using this. I can remove it, is isolated to a single piece versus a group of pieces.
And that's like, I recently had something that was like, this is deprecated, like, in my terminal, it's telling me like this thing. And I'm like, who's using that? Do I need that? Oh my God. Like, I was panicking because it was like beyond deprecated. It was like, there's security vulnerabilities. Get rid of it right now. And I'm like, so no,
this is serious. You need to address this. Right?
Like, seriously, stop ignoring me, Alyssa.
We're not passive aggressive anymore. We're just aggressive in the comment in the terminal.
But no, so I see that, Mike, and I'm excited about that. I just wanted to, can you both say with like at least 50% assurance that we are either breaking even with compiler load or better? We're not for sure making it worse.
So
I would say with a level of certainty that that's an accurate statement.
Okay.
Yeah.
Or at least breaking even.
Okay. We're gonna have Minko on. I think next week.
We're gonna grill him.
We're gonna ask him like, what is the bundle? How does this play out? I mean, my assumption is that the compiler and the bundling and everything is going to be handled under the hood. I mean, and ideally that would be the case. Like, we wouldn't, as developers, need to care about that, right? But I mean, to some degree, I think we still do. We still want to think about from a performance standpoint and things like that. You want to think about that size that we're delivering to the client in the web, because there's the download speed, people are on mobile, how long those bundles. And I think the biggest challenge is with people understanding NG modules, or us understanding NG modules, and what does it really mean? There's this hidden kind of thing of what is it? How does the compiler bundle that, and what is the size that gets delivered to the client that we kind of don't see, right? So we have an NG module that has 50 things in it, and our component is only using one of those 50 things, but we're delivering all the things. Like, it may not be visible to us, but it may impact the client, the user experience, right? So
if you can clean up your dependencies, for sure, making that easier from the developer experience side will give less work to potentially the compiler, but definitely to the tree shaking. So, I mean, I have no idea what type of savings we're talking about. We can talk to Minko about those pieces, but it's definitely lightening the mental load of the build process.
I just wanted to double check that it wasn't like the opposite of like, we're making developer experience better, but we're making user experience, at a cost to users, maybe. But
if I think about like that example I was saying before, where I have an NG module over here that has, like Mike said, all 10 of these components, right? So there's 2 top level components, and then there's 8 of them that are children, right? And all those 10 components are things that I need in my feature. So I declare all those in my NG module, right? And then over here in one of the top level components that I have for that feature, I get rid of that component, right? it's gone, but then I still haven't declared over here. Like there's no connection. The fact that like it understands that like these are used by this particular one. But when we do standalone, we say, hey, this is what this component needs. Yeah. Then like you're saying, the compiler and everything, I think there's that opportunity for it to understand that like, oh, I need these. So I do. This other standalone doesn't, that sort of thing.
I thought of a scenario that standalone brings to the table that we didn't have with ng modules. So the way that we were able to do lazy loading with ng modules is at the router level, to basically say, hey, I want to bring in and I want to lazily load in these things, or it may just be one thing inside that module. However, with standalone components, since it knows all of its dependencies, we can dynamically create components easily anywhere as part of like a hover. Hey, I want to be able to create a component. Okay, I can lazily import in using the import to be able to create that component at that time with the VCR. What is it? The view component ref. To basically say, hey, I want to dynamically create a component and put it here. That wasn't as easy to do with an ng module, but with a component, you have an isolated building block. So this gets into not just the developer experience, but also the user experience of basically saying, I can lazily create this thing. The compiler, the browser doesn't need to worry about doing anything with it, processing it until an on-demand piece. So that's a big use case to be able to move to standalone. And maybe that, as we talked about the migration of going from ng modules to standalone, that's probably a really good place to start, of saying, hey, where are you dynamically creating a component that you're right now eagerly loading that you potentially could lazy load?
So one of the places I started was at the route level when I route to a component, right? That made it felt pretty straightforward to do. Is that okay? This routed component is I'm gonna do that as standalone, and I'm gonna work my way through that. And that seemed pretty successful because at the router level, you're telling, hey, grab this component, right?
When the team announced standalone, there were 3 things that they like bookmarked and they stuck in my mind, and it was modules, components, and directives. Right? Like, does anything weird? We talked about modules and like how, if you get to that point, it'd probably be good to like change that at the base level. Talked about components, but like directives, you're just like, to just change how you import it. Like, where is there anything at like the base of my app that changes now? What do I?
You can look at it from the isolation level, that it's a separate digestible piece. And as we get into more and more, at least I've seen more and more people move towards a mono repo to have an isolated piece that can be separated out and used in multiple places. To me, the mental load is the big developer experience of knowing what individual piece needs to be able to create itself.
Oh, wait.
So we can remember that a component is just a directive with a selector, right? So a directive is really still at the heart of a component. So I believe that the directives can be configured. Well, they can be configured with providers and stuff. Can you set a directive as standalone? I haven't even tried that yet.
Yeah, directives and pipes.
Okay, but how? Like, is just a flag in your config? Where are we doing this?
Same exact piece
decorator
with the component as part of the metadata with at component, at directive, and at pipe. Just say standalone true.
Okay.
And then you can do providers, right? So if that has anything that it depends on, or imports, I guess, and be providers too.
Okay.
So we've talked about some of the benefits as we see them and use cases and what have you. But what we haven't covered at all is, how do I get there? How do I get started? There are 2 different initiatives ongoing right now. One is there's work on the schematic to do migration from ng module to standalone. I know very, very little about this, except that I know that it is.
Can you just say what you just said, but in a different way? What?
There's a way to run a schematic against your application to go from ng module based to standalone based.
Oh, okay.
I know very little about that. The other piece, well, I guess technically there's 3 right now. The other piece that I'm actively working on, I have a pull request to the CLI to update the schematics so that when you do ng new, you can add -- standalone, which will generate an application that is fully standalone without ng modules.
Nice.
The PR number is 24848.
You wanna screen share it? You wanna show it?
There's really not much to show. It's just
Okay.
it's that ng new application or workspace name -- standalone,
It's
and it
exciting.
will also work if you generate an additional application.
Okay.
So if you want to generate an application
What's the
inside of it
third way?
manually, you go ahead and you manually changing.
He got
No,
us.
it's not that bad. It's not that bad. I'll tell you from experience.
it really
it's not.
isn't.
It's
Okay.
But
It's not-
it'll help you to capture any potential additional dependencies.
Okay.
So I want to make a component that's currently declared in an ng module to standalone. First thing, add the standalone flag. Second thing, well, first of all, you could just try and run it and use it there.
Oh, okay, yeah.
After you delete it from the ng module, you can't declare it in the ng module anymore. So once you
or
do
you
those,
can run
two
it, and
things-
the error message will tell you.
Oh yeah.
That's true.
So you can
But in
run it
order
and
to be able to run it-
you can't do it.
yeah, you need to be able to do those 2 pieces.
Where's
One,
the standalone flag going again? I know you said it like 3 times.
in the add component metadata.
Oh.
So where you have this selector
At
as part of
config
that
flag?
object, standalone equals true.
Okay.
Cool.
Once you have those pieces, your application, or excuse me, your component will likely not work still, because you need to then move the
Why?
declarations of what it needs to work into the imports of that component. So if you're using ngIf, you're not saying, hey, I'm using ngIf or the common module. That needs to be imported in it. So my suggestion would be do it with nothing, see what's breaking,
What's breaking?
only pull in the dependencies
The
that
things
you
that
need,
you need.
so you don't get into the situation of, oh, I've just got a bloated list of dependencies that I'm pulling in here that I may or may not
May not need, right? Justin, are you up the app that you're doing standalone in? Are you at 15.2 or where are you at?
14.
14. Okay.
Mm-hmm. So anyway, anything from 14 up, right? I mean, I would encourage people.
I think it was a feature release. I
In
think it was
13, right?
14.2.
Oh wait.
Oh,
Oh, okay. Because I know it was like under a flag early. I just don't know which. Okay.
Yeah.
But so you're in 14 and it's working. Like you've.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I would encourage people to like give it a try, right? Like dive into it, give it a try. Like we're talking about, like go pick a component. Probably, to me, I think if you pick a component that you're routing to and start there, take that component, try the standalone, figure out what its dependencies are, get those in there and see what that experience is like.
Okay.
And I think that is a good way to get your kind of feet wet of what that means. Again, if you're starting a new application, sure, you got this opportunity, right? But if you're in an existing application, you want to start leveraging standalone, they can live together, no problem. And you can find a path to there. Just get in there and try it with one and get your feel, and you'll understand. I think like once you do the standalone true, right? And then you look at your several things, like you can look at your template for your component, and depending on what IDE or editor you're using, it's going to have, squigglies for you right away and saying, hey, I don't know what this child component is, or I don't know what this ngIf is.
Yeah.
And then you can use that to discover, oh, that's a dependency. I need to fill that out. And just go through what that feels like. And I think then you'll have this comparison of, oh, well, if I do standalone, now I see that I have to tell my component what it needs. It's not magically part of, some other module. And then you can compare that, and I think you'll be off and running.
Oh, that's exciting. The point though that you'd have to be fully standalone though to get rid of because let's say you still have ones that are depending on that module, like components that are depending on that module, but then this component standalone, you can't fully prune this up until you're all of them, right?
No, you can, because your component, right? When you do standalone, you're doing an imports property, right? With the same way your ng module has the imports, right? And you're importing dependencies, and that dependency could be another ng module, but it can also be a component that's standalone. So now you're able to, if I make a standalone component and I have a child component that's still in an ng module, I just import that ng module in my components decorator, and so they live side by side. It's really cool.
That's really freaking cool. Are you doing that right now? Do you have
Yeah.
that going on here? Oh, that's awesome.
Maybe we need to do like a micro episode, and I can demo like
Show like
change
maybe
it to
even
standalone,
converting
yeah.
one, you know, and like
Yeah,
showing
yeah,
those
yeah.
steps. I would love
I
that.
think that'd be fun.
Oh, that'd be so
We
nice.
should do that.
Ko. Sorry, I didn't mean to ignore you. I was saying I know some project leaders don't allow it. They don't allow team members to use new standards in an existing code base. I've heard that before in different companies that it has to be whatever they consider stable before they'll allow. I'm not really sure how to talk to, like, do you guys have advice for that? Like,
Yeah. So I think this is kind of like a, from a team leadership architecture standpoint for those teams, right? Understanding the challenge, and, so talking about it from that other side of it, maybe like why they would not allow that, right? Or how you handle that. If you're on that side of making that decision, hey, should I allow the team to leverage these new things? It's not just about let's consume this new thing, but it's about when you have a team full of people and you're trying to establish patterns that make it consistent. So everybody working on it can kind of have the same pattern, but important new people coming onto the project, you can onboard them pretty quickly because you have kind of this pattern and you don't get a mismatch, right? Managing that, and that's really kind of enterprise level development, like managing that along with consuming new approaches is a challenge, and you need to take some time to do that. And at some point you may make concessions and say, look, we can't do that yet because we don't have people that, we can guide them enough to, be consistent. Right. And I think that consistency is the challenge when you have a bunch of people working on a code base is establishing consistency helps to navigate that code. So, but there are ways, right? Like there are ways that you just need to, when you plan that, think about, okay, let's start leveraging standalone, but now how are we going to incorporate a pattern for that? And how do we say, here's the two patterns, like you could do this or this, and guide your team to do so.
And I'm going to totally deny saying this, even though it's being recorded and will be on YouTube. But they won't know if you create a branch locally. And don't push it.
And don't push it. You always try stuff out. If you're using Git or something in source control, you always try something out. You just roll back.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. This has been such a fun episode. I love the impromptu-ness of it. It was great. Thank you guys for your thoughts and your teachings. Do either of you have a pick before we roll out? Tell me your picks. Mike was nodding most vigorously, so he gets to go first.
My pick is to definitely not play Diablo 4 and just to play whatever game you're currently playing, because I hear it's like a big waste of time. You totally shouldn't do that and keep playing games with the friends you're currently playing with and not with your wife.
Yeah, that totally sounds like a good pick.
That's my pick.
Man, I have a lot of relationship management that I need to do this weekend. This is crazy. I have a couple of picks, but they're all based around shows, right? First of all, The Last of Us. I probably already picked this before, but I can't stop talking about this show. Like, it's amazing. I love everything of it. So, Last of Us on HBO. Ted Lasso season 3 is out.
Oh, it's out.
Yeah. First episode on Wednesday. I freaking love that show, man. So it's such positive vibes. Everything fits so well.
He is my spirit animal.
Oh my gosh. I'm like watching the show, and like in the middle of the show, I'm like, I love you, Ted Lasso. I couldn't. I just shouted it out by myself.
Yeah.
But
no, I'm with you. Yeah.
So it's amazing. So those are my picks.
Nice. Very cool. My pick is DevReach. Progress is hosting a conference called DevReach. We've had it for many, many years, and it's going to be back in Sofia, Bulgaria this fall. And the CFP closes Sunday. So if you wanted a chance, we are paying for flights and hotel and food and stuff if you get chosen. Sunday's the CFP close. And I think we're going to roll to sponsors, but have a marvelous weekend, everybody. That's a wrap.
Say yeah.
And now, a word from our sponsors. Oh, Kendo UI is a very sweet treat. Kendo UI is a juicy meat. Wait, no, it's not. They make components. But either way, they're still yummy for your eyes.
Amazing. Wow. Love it.
Have a good weekend.